Welcome everybody. I'm Todd Swarmstead. I'm the founder of the American Sign Museum. This is a Todd Talk. We've done a number of Todd Talks. This one specifically is going to be here on Main Street, and we're going to talk about the displays, the exhibits in the windows in particular. Now when people come here, they always like our Main Street with the big signs, the McDonald's sign is well known, the Howard Johnson sign, etc. But they kind of gloss over the storefront windows. So this evening, we're going to concentrate on the displays in the storefront windows, and particularly the windows we're going to talk about tonight involve sign painting. So we actually have a sign painter here in our audience, Tim McComas from Brushworks here in Cincinnati. And as we take a look at the individual windows in the storefront, you're going to see some nice Christmas holiday graphics on the windows, and these were created by Tim, especially for an event that we'll be doing December 11th, holiday celebration. So I decided it's very nice to have Tim here tonight. So, to tell you a little bit about the storefronts. The first part of the museum, we try to educate you about various periods of signs, how signs are made, various materials that are used. But then you come out to what we call the grand finale, which is signs on Main Street, where we constructed three-dimensional storefronts. Each storefront is designed around a sign we have. So they're designed backwards. I'll point these out as we go through, but right here you see this drug sign. This is from Buffalo, New York. This is probably early 50s, so we designed an early 50s drugstore. Now you would think what you'd want to do is put drugstore items in the drugstore, but my idea was to use the storefront windows of the individual storefronts as display cases for some of the smaller items in the museum's collection. It's a lot more fun than just having kind of a oak and glass case. So every window has a particular theme, and that's what I'm going to concentrate on tonight. This is a rare chance to have a look at these items and have a little bit of explanation about what they are. So the theme for the drugstore is sign painting. So there's a variety of materials and tools and objects that sign painters would use. We're going to move over to this window here. Some of these windows have a lot of history to them. Now you see, right hanging from the top of the storefront, you'll see EHW signs. This was Elmo Wilson, which won't mean a whole lot to you, but Elmo Wilson was a sign painter. This kit right here, this sign painter kit. Now a sign painter kit is a box with drawers, and they're often custom made, handmade, where the sign painter keeps their brushes, their paints, and the other items that they use to paint signs. This belonged to Elmo Wilson, and was a gift to us by a guy named Bob Fitzgerald out of Manasquan, New Jersey. And you're going, well, what's the big deal? Who's Bob Fitzgerald? Bob Fitzgerald wrote a book called Practical Sign Shop back in the early 50s that was published by Signs of the Times magazine. He also wrote a number of articles for Signs of the Times over 20 or 30 years. So Bob was pretty well known in the industry. If you wanted to get a start in the sign industry, you bought his book called Practical Sign Shop Operation. So this was donated by Bob to us. Elmo Wilson was his mentor. So there's a lot of history here. But a very kind of simple box, just very wood construction, not too many compartments. There's, I'm sure this was packed with a lot more materials originally. But you see this, and then this stick, or this flat kind of stick that's on a diagonal, that's called a maul stick. And that's what a sign painter would use to steady their hand if they were lettering on a truck or a window. They would actually, we've got another one here. This one happens to be very unusual because usually they have like a little ball or something soft at the end of it. This just has a wooden kind of cone. I've never really seen that before. So that belonged to Elmo Wilson. So usually what you're doing is holding the maul stick and putting your hand on there and letting it kind of steadies your hand. Now, Tim would be much more expert at I'm not sure. There is discussion.
Yeah.
Some sign painters use maul sticks and some don't. It's probably maybe 50-50.
On rare occasion, I use one. Most of the time, I'm hand over hand.
Yeah, he's more like this.
Yeah,
Okay.
I learned to do that.
This little case here in the back, it's a little flat tape that held all of Elmo Wilson's brushes. So that little case fit inside the top of this box. Now, this sign kit here, you might recognize the shape of it. It's a typical box that a carpenter might buy at a hardware store, although it's obviously painted up. This belonged to a guy named Charles Stanley. And Charles Stanley was a sign painter at Coney Island, which is an amusement park here in Cincinnati along the Ohio River. He was quite a character. I understand that he actually bought or owned at one time the car that Bonnie and Clyde were caught in. It's riddled with bullets, and he had that car and it went around the country. He sold tickets to come and view the car that Bonnie and Clyde. So he was pretty much of a showman. But that's his kit right there. Now here's another sign painter kit. This might have been a one-of-a-kind sign kit, handmade by a metal shop, or it could have been something that you bought. By the 40s or 50s, sign kits were available from a sign supply house, a distributor. Okay, but again, a lot of people made their own kits. Now this kit back here, U.S. as in Army, U.S. Army. It says on the bottom, chest, sign painting equipment. So actually, this was issued by the Army for sign painters who worked in the Army. There's a couple of other small tools that sign painters would use that I thought I might show you. There's a little kind of a handle with a rod on it. At the end of that rod is kind of like a gear that rotates. That's called a pounce wheel. Now, if you're a seamstress, then you know what I'm talking about. What they would do is they would make a full-size pattern of artwork that they were going to paint on a window, on a truck, or whatever. Then the lines for that, they would run that pounce wheel over the lines in the artwork. It would make little dots, or holes in the pattern. And then they would come back with a pounce bag. There happens to be one, I think, right here. Just have to find it in the sign kit. I don't know if you can see this, but so this is a pounce bag that's filled with chalk. So they just pounce that on those holes in the pattern, and it leaves like a dot outline. And then they can come back with a grease pencil and draw in those lines on the truck, on the window, whatever. Or they can just work directly from those dots. So that's how they would transfer a pattern. Later on, a guy named Hansey got his first name. He developed a little box that was not quite as messy as a pounce bag. And there's one of those, I think, in this window, or it's maybe in the other window over there. The other thing in here is kind of what I would call a mechanical striping tool. Now, most stripers, there are special brushes that stripers use, often called a dagger, and they hand stripe. But there was a tool that was invented, a little jar of paint with a little very fine tube that came out of it that you could also use for pin striping. And there's a couple of these down here in the lower part of the window. So this is a good start on some of the sign painting kits and materials we have on display. There's some more up here. We thought we point out sometimes sign kits were very plain without any lettering at all, and others were quite fancy. We just actually acquired this one right here, Central Advertising Sign Company. It's gonna be in our next newsletter. This is probably from turn of the century, maybe 1890s, 1900. Very nice pictorial work. Now, you're probably wondering about the E after advertising. That was an accepted spelling of advertising at that time. We point out in the newsletter that Webster didn't have out his dictionary yet to standardize spelling, so there was a little bit of, let's call it, flexibility in spelling. A couple more sign kits here. Here's another sign kit where there's a bunch of brushes in here. The individual trays, like I talked about, with some more brushes. They packed a lot of tools and equipment and materials in these little sign kits. Now this kit right here, this is on a special sign kit. It's on wheels. If you were painting, if you had to park your truck and you had to walk into a shopping center or something and letter it, or if you were at maybe hot rod rally or hot rod meet, some sign painters would create a rolling sign kit, and that's what this is. You can see all the different drawers, some with brushes, some with paint, etc., etc. Anything is like a rolling sign shop. Okay, this was used by a sign painter named Mark Beatty in Waukee, Iowa. So let's go over to some of the other materials in this window. This window is divided into kind of three sections. Up on top are some samples of vintage cans of various varnishes that sign painters would use. A lot of times they backed up gold leaf with varnish. Otherwise, when you clean the window, they would pull the gold leaf off. That was one of the more common uses of varnish. Lettering enamels, which is the paint that sign painters use, really didn't come about until the 30s. Prior to that, there wasn't really any specialized sign paint. It was just kind of like maybe you used house paint. But like early house paint, what they would do is they would use white lead and mix in the pigments and kind of mix up their own colors. You know, by the 30s, maybe late 20s, they started actually having cans of pre-mixed paint. And down here on the bottom are some more specialty supplies that sign painters would use. Some more varnishes, but also some bronze powders. There's some glass beads in this little one jar where they would paint maybe a traffic sign and then sprinkle these beads on it so it was kind of reflective, way before we had reflective film. So there's a bunch more materials in here. Stepping over here, this little card on the top here shows a variety of paintbrushes, all from one manufacturer. So there was a traveling salesman who would call on sign shops with paint, with brushes, with gold leaf, whatever sign painters would use, and this was his sample of every type of brush that they offer. Okay, sign painters' brushes are very specialized depending upon whether they're lettering a brick wall, a billboard, a truck. I mentioned before pinstriping, gold leaf. In fact, this is a really odd one. This is called a gilder's tip, and this is how you lay gold leaf. Okay, so that's a pretty odd brush. So again, brushes are very specialized for sign painters. Moving down to this shelf here, these are all wood graining materials. So if you want to put a wood grain on the background of a sign, These are the materials you would use. This little piece of curved plastic, you have the paint would be wet, and you put that on there and kind of rock it, and it would create a knot. And then you could play with it a little bit, make it more customized in exact circles. This long brush here is for creating grain. This roller here could also create grain. There were many sign painters turn of the century, probably up to the 20s and 30s, that could also wood grain. They might have at their command 10 different types of woods that they could make a faux finish of. Walnut, redwood, oak, golden oak, etc., etc. Speaking of wood graining, I really like salesman samples. When you go through the museum, you'll see a lot of different salesman samples. These samples right here, there's five panels of from a company called the Upson Company. It's kind of the company that made composite panels, like you think of masonite. That's a composite panel. It's basically pressed. 5 different panels that were offered depending upon what the sign painter required. And there's actually a letter that came in with the original letter that came with the samples was in the packet. I think that's kind of neat to have that whole thing. And then there's an article, a copy of an article from Signs of the Times, how to use Upson board. Moving over here, next window. Here's another hand lettered sign kit. And then this up here, if you look at this panel, the Fred Boehm sign painter, and then look at the piece next to it, you can kind of see those little arms that are folded down like this. What that is that's a panel that you could slide into the side window of your car, much like the cup holders that you see. So a sign painter could hand letter it, and when he was working, put that on the side of his door to indicate that he was working. When he wasn't, he could take it off. Kind of like what they use magnetic signs now. The plumber puts it on his truck. When he goes home, maybe he takes it off. Okay. This artwork there is probably turn of the century, 1900, 1910 design. It's not old. It was done by the sign painter who had these in his possession and donated them to the museum. But he wanted to put a vintage look, or use a piece of period artwork, which is very appropriate because these are from the teens, 20s. One of the other types of tools that some sign painters specialize in was the speedball pen. A speedball pen was primarily used for paper signs. There's all types of width of the stroke of letter, of the nib, which is the end of the pen. This display case right here came from an art supply store, and it was a sample kit or a sample case with the various sizes of nibs. So that was kind of cool to have that. Speedball put out a number of free books on techniques to employ with their speedball pens. And these are some. This one's the 14th edition. This is the 13th. Actually got a second edition back there. These are highly prized by people that collect sign painter books, which I admit is a small group, but there are such people, like the museum, that collect old sign painting books. I mentioned those little boxes that were pounce boxes. There's one right down here. Now this sign painter kit in the back here, it's on an angle, looks much like a tackle box. That's probably what it was originally, was a tackle box. This belonged to a sign painter named Chuck Boscheman, who last time I knew he was in Roswell, New Mexico. every sign shop he worked at is lettered, or one of their cards is glued on here and then cleared. So this is a whole history of his career as a sign painter. You'll see down in the lower left, McConville Sign Company, it says NZ, that's in New Zealand, and that says 1975. Community Signs, TX for Texas, 76. Eugene Signs, which I can't quite see because it's blocked, but I'm going to imagine that's from Oregon. So his whole career, he carried the legacy of his whole career on his sign painter balls. So I thought that was a very interesting piece. So this highlights some of the tools and equipment, sign kits that sign painters would use. We're going to move up to this next series of windows. And we're going to start talking about some of the sign painter books that were available for sign painters. We already mentioned Bob Fitzgerald's Practical Sign Shop Operation, but there were a number of other books available. One of the most well-known books is a book by a sign painter from Mississippi called Frank Atkinson. Frank Atkinson wrote a book in 1909 called Sign Painting Up to Now. It was republished in 1915, 1923, and 1935. But what that book carried in it were 96 pages. Each page had a black and white plate or a panel of a suggested sign. So it was an idea book to take designs from. Now there's a group called the Letterheads, which all started in Denver back in the early 70s, a group of sign painters who were apprentices and would meet after work in a bar and pore over these old sign painting books that they would find, like Frank Atkinson's Sign Painting Up to Now. And so this book is this Sign Painting Up to Now. If you can find a good copy of it, it sells for $200 or $300. The Letterheads, as they were looking at the books, each plate again is black and white line art, but below it is a paragraph description of the colors to use on the various parts of that panel, because they weren't really printing 4-color books back then. It was very unusual to find a book printed in 4-color. So what the Letterheads decided to do is, Letterheads, that little group of 8 guys in Denver, became a national movement. So there were letterhead meets, gathering of letterheads all over the country. They could be local. A guy could say, I'm going to have a letterhead meet, and people, sign painters from maybe 100 miles circumference or diameter would come and meet at the guy's shop. And there were also annual letterhead meets, which might attract 200 or 300 people. Letterheads got the idea of recreating the black and white panels that were in the Atkinson's book and reproduce them in the colors described in the paragraph on each page. Okay, so all of these panels here are letterhead projects of panels that were in the original Frank Atkinson book. This one right here happens to be from a local sign painter named Dauber. That's his street name. His real name's Jim Fogg. But a lot of these are signed by the sign painter, and they vary. This one has variegated gold leaf and gold leaf. This one actually here is actually glue chipped glass, so they're plain and fancy. There's also some more panels over here. And if you could look in the window, we've actually got the book open to one of the pages of one of the panels that you can see. So there were actually 96 of these plates, of these recreations of the plates. The museum has probably as a gift, maybe 12 or 15 of those. I think there's eight here on display. Now we were talking about sign painter books, and the rest of these windows here kind of highlight some of the books that sign painters learn from. This piece up here, it says Angel Guild, and then it says Signs of the Times at the top. Angel Guild was a lost technique of a way to gild glass with a solution rather than with sheets of gold leaf. It was rediscovered, the process was rediscovered by a guy named Rick Lawson, who was probably the world's expert at restoration of reverse glass signs. So Rick discovered this process and wrote an article about how to do Angel Guild, and he actually created the cover, the art for the cover of the magazine using the Angel Guild process. You can see it on the Angel Guild is blue chip glass that's been gilded using the Angel Guild process. And then there's actually beveled glass on there, which was done by a friend of Rick's named Pat Mackle, who lives in Monrovia, California, and that's backed up with Angel Guild gold leaf. So that was a really nice piece to have. The idea for that was actually hatched at a letterhead meet in Santa Cruz in 1984. I was out at the meet and I was talking to Rick, and he was talking about Angel Guild, and I said, well, why don't you make a cover using that when you write the article? So really, there's a lot of history. Rick has passed away, but we called him Dr. Feingold, and he was in Wilmington, California. His sign shop was named Feingold Sign Company. Couple more books on the shelf right below the cover. Textbook of gilding written by Charles Wagner. Charles Wagner had one of the early sign painting schools. Then a couple more books written by manufacturers of gold leaf, showing how to use their product. Below that, there's some books. There's a modern show card lettering, Bill Boley's Basics of Lettering. These are mainly books on show cards, on how to letter on show cards. Show cards are, you would probably call them cardboard signs. Show cards are usually temporary signs, obviously for indoors, since they're painted on show cards stuck with this colored cardboard. Moving over here, there's a couple of courses, books here about courses on sign painting. There's a book here, 1,000 Show Card Layouts by H.C. Martin. This book was published in 1928. H.C. Martin wrote a lot of articles for Signs of the Times. And then he put out these little pamphlets. I think they were in a series of 8. We've got 3 of them on display here. This window down here is a tribute to a sign painter named Don Sturtevant, who also produced a book that was sold by Signs of Times. And there's actually an envelope in here from Signs of the Times addressed to him. It was a check for the royalties from his book for that month. So it's kind of neat to have that. Over here, one of the things that sign painters really get jazzed about is alphabets. You might call, if you're a type designer, you might call them fonts. Sign painters call them alphabets, same thing. And the more alphabets you have a command of, kind of the better sign painter you are. Everybody also has their specialty alphabet. Like a casual is kind of the casual stuff you might put on a race car, the kind that they drive Saturday night in a demolition derby. So it's really quick casual lettering. All the way down to like the Times Roman, a very fine, detailed Times Roman. This this alphabet up here on this poster was created by a guy named Al Zanetti from New Jersey. It says, sign painting is a skill. When developed, it is a craft and an art. How true that is. So this is one of the alphabets he did. There's a couple books here of hand-lettered alphabets. And then this card down here, this panel was created by a guy out of Toledo, Ohio, Mr. Keith Connect. And he's also featured over in our show card area. This is his, it says, old-fashioned show card alphabet. He created this for a letterhead meet in 1987, and he gave it to the museum. Yeah. Here's some more sign painting books. A little bit about some more on show card lettering. This book, back in the corner, Strong's Book of Designs, was published in 1910. It was one of the other treasured books that the letterheads would take projects from when they met in that bar in Denver. This piece up here is all about the use of color. We talked about Mark Beatty, who had that rolling sign kit. He would do a lot of workshops at the letterhead meets, and one of the workshops he did in particular was on color. So he created 25 of these pieces, and then he gave one of them to the museum. Okay, so let's move down to the next window. So all of these windows are about sign painting and some of the master sign painters through the years that have helped aspiring sign painters. This portrait here, obviously Mike Stevens, you're gonna go, well, what's the big deal? Mike Stevens wrote a book called Mastering Layout. Now, which became a classic book for sign painters. It could also be used for any designer, but he wrote it particularly for sign painters. People that are visual have a natural understanding of balance and use of color. It's just if you're not visual, then you don't have that knack or that talent. So what Mike did is he took kind of the inherent art of design and layout and scientifically explained why it works for people who aren't as visual. This became a classic book for sign painters. And this pictorial of Mike was painted by a sign painter named Bill Hugh, who was also an excellent portrait artist. He got his start painting large billboards, painted bulletins is what we call them. So there's a signed copy of Mike's Mastering Layout. He did another book later on called 99 Show Cards. And then his mentor was a guy named Duke Wellington, who wrote a book, The Theory and Practice of Poster Art. And Signs of the Times published Duke Wellington's book, and Duke also wrote a lot of articles in Signs of the Times. And then there's some other sign painting books down here. Moving over to this window, this features a couple more sign painters who are very important in the history of sign painting. These three sample pieces, these gold leaf sample pieces here, were done by a guy named Alf Becker. And you're going, well, who's Alf Becker? Well, Alf Becker was a sign painter from East St. Louis. Somehow he met my grandfather, and my grandfather was taken with his command of alphabets. And he wanted Alf Becker to create 12 different alphabets, letter them on the sides of a page of the magazine. So they ran 12 different alphabets, ran one each month for 12 months. And then he did 12 more, and it was such a hit with the readers of Signs of the Times that he ended up doing 232 different alphabets. So it's really nice to have these sample pieces from Alf Becker. These hung in the shop that he worked in East St. Louis, and one of them is actually signed Alf R. Becker, which I really treasure. Signs of the Times took the 100 most popular of those 232 alphabets and compiled them into a book in the late 40s with a spiral binding. Now that book, if you could find that book, that's really treasured by sign painters. And then this picture up here, it's kind of a sad picture. It's a little boy who's only got a little bit of money, and there's a puppy in the window, and it says $15. And he's looking at the money in his hand going, I don't have $15. Well, this was a scene that Alf Becker painted over and over and over and over again to make side money. I would have thought he would have done pretty well as a sign painter, but apparently he would paint these. Now, we got a call one time from a woman in Michigan who said they were cleaning out her grandfather's log cabin up in the woods, and this painting was hanging over the fireplace. And she goes, it was signed in the lower right-hand corner, Alf R. Becker. So she went online and did a search and found out about Alf Becker and called me up and said, we got this painting of this little boy looking at a puppy for sale in a window. Would you want that? It says Alf Becker. And I said, I would love to have it. So she's really glad that it's now here on display rather than lost in that cabin in the woods. So that's a really nice piece to have. Now I'm going to end with this piece right here. This is a salesman's sample kit here in the back with individual framed glass panels. Some of them are spread around here in the window as samples so you can see them a little better. So this sample kit belonged to a sign painter named Raymond LeBlanc from Hartford, Connecticut. Raymond LeBlanc specialized in gold leaf. And he actually wrote a book in 1963 called Gold Leaf Techniques, which Signs of the Times published. It became the classic book on how to gild. So all these panels were in that kit back there. Signs of the Times was kind of cleaning out their office, and they found this box in the back of the safe. And they brought it to me and they said, we don't know what this is. Tell us what this is. Well, I opened it up and I could see that it was a gold leaf sample kit. And then there was a letter in the top of it, or stuck down between the panels, and I pulled that out and I read the letter, and basically here's what it said. It was addressed to my grandfather, who was Dave R. Swarmstead Sr., and it says, hey Dave, I'm getting up in years. None of my kids want to continue the sign painting trade or business. I don't know what to do with my gold leaf sample kit. I think I'm going to send it to you guys because you'll know what to do with it. And I get a little emotional about this sometimes because this is probably, if there was one piece that I ever found that got me to start the sign museum, it was finding this sample kit. Because once again, squirreled away in a safe somewhere where nobody knows what it is, who cares? Now it's on display here in the museum, reaffirming the legacy of Raymond LeBlanc and all the people that learned gold leaf from his book. There's actually a couple cuts in the back. Now a cut is a copper engraved plate. That's how they used to print halftones in a book. I found those, those were going to be thrown out, and so I grabbed them. So this particular window has special importance to me and any sign painter that ever turned the pages of Raymond LeBlanc's book. I thank you for coming tonight. We've got some more windows that we're probably going to be doing in part 2.